Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you, and today I am here bringing you my retro album of the month. Now, this is something I've done for a very, very long time on my radio show, and now I'm going to bring it to the podcast. And what the retro album of the month is, essentially the best way to explain it is I have an album of the month for the current release year, which right now is 2023. So it can be anything before that, but normally I pick an album that came out at least 10 years ago. I like to revisit some albums from time to time that were really good, that most of us may or may not have forgotten about, and really put them in the spotlight yet again and kind of put them into context many years later after they came out. So without further ado, my album of the month for February 2023, the retro album of the month is Silicon Messiah by Blaze. And of course, this is the band that Blaze Bayley formed after he was out of Iron Maiden. And eventually he changed the moniker from Blaze to just his regular name, Blaze Bayley, later on. But he did release 3 albums under this name. He had another album called 10th Dimension, and of course, Blood and Belief. And I was sort of inspired to go back and listen to that back catalog after I did that interview with Danny Lobla of Halloween, the drummer of Halloween, who played in Blaze's band before joining Halloween. I thought to myself, man, I'm going to go revisit some of this material, and I forgot just how good this stuff was. Now, this is an interesting story, folks, because Blaze Bayley went from being probably still considered one of the worst replacement singers for any big name heavy metal band in history to a guy that really redeemed himself with his solo career. Because the stuff with Iron Maiden, him being an Iron Maiden, in my opinion, I consider him probably the worst replacement singer you could possibly have imagined, or at least one of them, for Iron Maiden. But his solo stuff is absolutely phenomenal. And in some cases, I think some of these these Blaze albums were better than some of the Iron Maiden albums that Bruce Dickinson put out, obviously after he had come out. So, folks, for some of you younger people that don't know, and I'll give a little bit of a background on the story, back in 1993, Bruce Dickinson had announced during the Fear of the Dark tour that he was going to be leaving Iron Maiden, which was kind of a crazy period because that was around the time that metal was considered not cool. And, the Fear of the Dark tour was still doing very well worldwide, but Bruce had enough at that point, and he decided to leave the band. Now, there was one last concert. It was a pay-per-view concert. It was Bruce's last show at that time. And then the band was basically searching for a new singer. And so the band was basically received hundreds of demo tapes from hundreds of singers around the world looking to get that gig. And it was even rumored at the time that Michael Kiske, who was just out of Halloween at that point, back in 1994, was a candidate to replace Bruce, which later on Kiske kind of refuted and said no, and he basically had said that he probably would not have joined the band anyway. So after hundreds and hundreds of singers and demo tapes of singers, audition tapes for the band, Iron Maiden miraculously decides to bring on Blaze Bayley, a guy with a voice that definitely did not fit any of Iron Maiden's music. And even on the 2 albums that he did with Virtual 11 and The X Factor, he really didn't sound great with the band at all. And if you really think about it, Iron Maiden they do play songs off of those albums, and when Bruce sings them, they sound a lot better. And it really became a case of Iron Maiden really not writing songs suited for Blaze's voice, and he really didn't have the vocal range to sing most, if not all, of the material live, which really basically with a lot of disgruntled Maiden fans did not like Blaze Bayley in the band at all, including myself. I really at the time, I really didn't think he was a great replacement. And the thing that's crazy, I will never forget, I think it was Metal Edge magazine back then in the early 90s, when they had talked about the future of Iron Maiden. There was a little clip or a little article, and I'll never forget how they described him. They described him as a Bruce Dickinson lookalike and a David Lee Roth sound-alike. And while I have nothing against David Lee Roth because I thought he was a great singer with Van Halen, at the same time, David Lee Roth and a voice that sounds like his definitely does not and never will suit Iron Maiden. It just never will. So Blaze was a terrible replacement for Bruce Dickinson. And I hate to say that because Blaze is a nice guy, but let's call it for what it is. However, let's fast forward 4 or 5 years later. Blaze Bayley is out of Iron Maiden. Bruce Dickinson decides to come back. And then, of course, the Ed Hunter tour begins with Bruce back in the band. And then, of course, that left Blaze Bayley basically off on his own to do something else. Now, most of us at the time, at least myself, thought, man, this guy's probably going to fade into oblivion for a while. But that's not what happened. Blaze Bayley actually ended up getting another band together. He actually started working with one of the greatest metal producers and sound guys of all time in Andy Sneap, and he formed his own band called Blaze. And this is where the story goes from really bad to really awesome, because there was already a knock on Blaze Bayley for being a very bad replacement for Bruce Dickinson. Sometimes when that happens, it's really hard for guys to redeem themselves. But Blaze really did a good job at doing that. And this album called Silicon Messiah came out. Now, I have to say I was a little skeptical because back when I was doing the radio, back in the early days of the radio show, I remember getting this promo copy from SPV to check out this new album. Now, me personally, I always thought that when he was in Maiden, I thought, man, these guys are writing, like Bruce Dickinson should be singing these songs. Now, granted, I'm not a big fan of the X Factor or Virtual 11 as far as the songs go, but, tracks like The Klansman were very good. Future Real really wasn't too bad. Bruce does a great rendition of Man on the Edge, Lord of the Flies, Sign of the Cross. I mean, Iron Maiden does not shy from those songs, and I give them credit for that. Because if you notice, Judas Priest doesn't really touch anything from the Ripper Owens era at all. But Iron Maiden doesn't shy away from those songs. And actually, Bruce sounds amazing singing those songs live. And so it really adds to them, which is another sign that Blaze was a very bad replacement for him. But here comes Silicon Messiah. Okay. And I have to say, when I heard of this, I was a little skeptical. I'm like, am I really going to like this? How good is this album really going to be? And this was really before Andy Sneap really started coming into prominence as a producer. He really kind of stopped doing that. I really didn't know who he was. And not many people did in comparison today, where Andy Sneap's pretty much a god, mixing albums. I mean, he's like one of the gods of mixing thrash metal albums, right? Or even power metal for that matter. But I didn't really know much about Andy Sneap, but I remember getting the record from SPV. And when I listened to this for the first time, about halfway through it, I was blown away. I could not believe how great it sounded. And finally, there is a band writing songs that suit Blaze Bayley's voice. Now, the stuff with Wolfsbane really wasn't too bad. It fit his voice. I didn't think it was really that bad. I mean, Live Fast, Die Fast is a decent record. I mean, the rest of the Wolfsbane catalog was kind of hit or miss, but I really wasn't expecting the ass kicking I got when I listened to Silicon Messiah, and then of course 10th Dimension and Blood and Belief, which came afterwards. But Blaze Bayley is a guy that really redeemed himself musically, because I'll be honest with you, when Brave New World by Iron Maiden came out with Bruce, I liked Silicon Messiah a lot better, and I still do. Just the quality, the production, the songwriting is absolutely phenomenal. And Blaze really did redeem himself as a musician and as a singer. And he's done pretty well, to be honest with you. His solo career, I know he's not playing in like giant arenas or anything like that, but the quality of the albums for the most part have been pretty good, even when he changed the name to Blaze Bayley. Now, I have had Blaze on this show before, on my radio show, and really, really nice guy. Really, very, actually, the one thing that he was very, very, not quiet, but he was very, very mellow and just a really humble, really nice person. And this is a story of turning really turning your reputation around. Now, a lot of Maiden fans still do not really like him, like his era of the band, and for the most part, that era is basically forgotten about by most of the fans, because it was a very bad time for heavy metal, and it really was probably the lowest point for Iron Maiden in their career. But many of those fans, when they heard the Silicon Messiah album, were blown away by it. Now, I think 10th Dimension was probably a better album, and I like Blood and Belief better than this one. But this is definitely, one of the greatest comeback albums by any musician ever, because you went from being considered the worst replacement ever for a singer in a prominent heavy metal band to really redeeming yourself and putting out an album of the year candidate. Because I think back then this was like top 3 or 4. I don't remember now, but this was up there as far as my favorite releases of the year. I used to listen to this all the time. And when I revisited the album, and I love the concept about behind the album, Silicon Messiah. But when I listen to this album, it's still just as good now as it was back then. The material is definitely different than Iron Maiden. It's a lot heavier. It's a much different record than what Maiden was putting out at the time, or anything that he did in that band. And to be honest with you, the production is about 10 times better than anything Iron Maiden has produced, say, over the last 20 some years with Bruce in it. I mean, and when I say production, I'm talking the sound of the album. I mean, again, Andy Sneap had a lot to do with this record. If you look in the credits, even when you look in the notes, they talk about working with Andy on this album. So I have to say, if you have never checked this out, and if you forgot about this record, I definitely, go back and check it out again. If you're a younger fan of Iron Maiden and you know who Blaze Bayley is, and you don't like him in the band, because I'll tell you what, I think there's a B-side, I think it's the Future Real single, if I remember, where they have a version of Blaze singing The Evil That Men Do. It is absolutely horrendous. Okay. And a lot of fans have heard that. But at the same time, I do want to tell you folks that if you haven't checked out this Blaze album or any of his solo material, he really has redeemed himself as a musician. And this stuff is absolutely phenomenal. And in many cases, I think it's a lot better than most of the material. Again, most of the material that Maiden has put out over the last 23 years. So check it out, folks. Silicon Messiah by Blaze Bayley. Again, this is a phenomenal record. I'm sure the songs are out there on YouTube somewhere or on some streaming service. Give it a listen. It actually is very good. And it's a record that a lot of people forget about. When it came out, actually, too, it received a lot of favorable reviews from the press. A lot of the press, at least the press people that I knew, absolutely loved it. And if there's ever an ultimate story of redemption for your musical career, it's this. Now, granted, did Blaze ever get as big as Iron Maiden has become? And is he playing big shows like Iron Maiden is? No. But I'm really more or less talking about the caliber of music that he's put out as opposed to the crowd sizes. And even though he's never reached that level that he did in Iron Maiden, playing in front of these huge crowds, he definitely redeemed himself musically to me with this first Blaze album entitled Silicon Messiah, and of course the rest of the catalog he has put out. So I'm kind of curious at your thoughts. Do you like Silicon Messiah? Do you like Blaze Bayley's solo stuff outside of Iron Maiden? Do you like Blaze Bayley in Iron Maiden? I don't think I know anybody that did, but there might be somebody out there that likes them. Please comment on the video. I definitely am interested in your opinion, folks. And with that said, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Again, my retro album of the month is Silicon Messiah. And if you like what you saw and heard in this video, please subscribe and hit the like button. With that said, I'll see you next time.